To get into some of this week's top business headlines and other topics with me today is Muktar Mohammed, CEO Finance with Muktar. Thank you for joining me, Muktar. Great to have you again on the show.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning to you. So this story, the first one we want to discuss is NLNG's gas delivery deficit. What is going on and what is really causing these supply constraints?
I think we also have to look at earlier in the year, remember there was an explosion in one of their terminals. So at that time, it affected their production level for up to like 2 or 3 months. They were almost shut down. And also that also in turn affected even the local delivery here in Nigeria. So I'm not too so surprised about that, knowing that they are coming off, they're just coming out of that and thinking that they must have been working on ways to improve their constraint. And also, you mustn't forget the security challenges still there in the Niger Delta. We still have the security challenge that have to do with oil theft. And so security also is a big problem for them also. But the only challenging part of it is you see a country like Algeria and of recent making mention of that they even have surplus in terms of meeting up with their supplies and expanding their supplies to other countries. But Nigeria here, we are struggling with constraint. Just has to do with logistic issues, like I said initially. But again, I think the major challenge they are coping is this security challenges in the Niger Delta.
Yeah. And, this is really interesting because you would have seen the news recently that Qatar signed a 25-year LNG contract with China. With all these supply disruption challenges and the implications for Nigeria, even from a revenue perspective, can we ever hope to replicate that type of deal with a major demand center like China? What are your thoughts?
I think it will be difficult because of the terrain unless we do something about our security. Our security has been the major challenge that we are fighting in this country, especially in the Niger Delta. If we address the security challenges, I don't think it's rocket science. It's not something that we cannot achieve. Remember, NLNG has been the cash cow that have even been remitting some money to the Nigerian government in terms of dividend payout. They have not failed in that. And that also have to do with the type of system that is put in place. So I think all they need to do is to improve the security challenges in there. And I'm sure things will get better. When you talk about security challenges, talk about the last explosion that happens in the LNG gas plant. It has to do with a security breach. So definitely by the time they improve that, I think we'll be able to meet up any demand in any part of the world. Remember that we still have the second largest gas depot in the world. So definitely most economy in the world will be looking forward to do business with Nigeria.
Yeah, thanks, Muktar. I mean, it's clearly huge potential there in the gas supply potential of the country. Now, let's look at the news that has been making waves around the world. Cryptocurrency, Bankman-Fried, he was a poster child of crypto exchanges and trading globally. He's now been arrested in the US. What does this really spell for the future of the cryptocurrency market in your view?
Well, when you look at him as the king of crypto, they were comparing him to the Warren Buffett of crypto. But again, it brought back what we've always said in terms of crypto. It has to do with regulatory challenges. As long as the fundamentals are not strong and the regulators are not allowed to regulate that space, we'll continue to have this challenge. Because if you look at the charge brought against him, you realize it has to do with regulation because they were not regulated. So funds were being moved for electoral campaign, both for the Republican and the Democrat. So in that, you see that challenges has to do with regulation. Then fundamentals is not there in crypto because that if you want to do any economy or any company, you look at the fundamentals. When you talk about Nigeria, you look at the GDP. When you talk about companies, you look at their profit after tax. You look at the kind of product they are delivering. You look at what was their history. You don't have this in crypto. So what you see is crypto is being driven by sentiment, whereby sentiment that sometimes can be driven by individuals. Remember that if you see that, you remember that even Elon Musk at a point said that you can purchase electric car with crypto, and then earlier on, then he changed his mind. And so definitely, you look at that. There's no fundamental in crypto. There's no asset that is tied to any cryptocurrency company. So that's basically is the main tool for investment. When you look at investments, you're trying to look at investment. You look at the asset, you look at the liability, you look at the earnings, and you look at the challenges. In crypto, it seems to be just operating based on sentiment, or what we call driven by market. And if you looked at its own issue, they said when individuals begin to withdraw so much, about $6 billion dollars were withdrawn, it became a challenge for him. So definitely, it more looks like a Ponzi scheme that is being arranged like an investment vehicle.
Yeah, but Muktar, some would argue at one point the entire crypto market had a market capitalization of over $2 trillion, certainly not as big as other assets, alternative types of assets. But the fact that you have companies using it for payment systems, accepting it as transactional currency, must mean that clearly it carries some weight around the world. So does this spell the end of the crypto market, or are we just going to see tighter regulation in the market?
I don't think it's well the end. When you talk about how many, you need to look at how many companies, how many big companies that are involved in crypto. When you look at the largest economy, the second largest economy in the world, which is China, they didn't want to hear anything about crypto. They banned crypto in their own space and using an excuse like have to do with climate change also. So definitely, are we seeing the end of crypto? I don't think so. Maybe we might see tighter regulatory. And once those tighter regulatory comes in, most of these crypto assets will not be attractive again for investors. And so gradually, we could see the end of it, but it might take a gradual procedure. Remember, we used to have something we call Swiss gold. It was something like this some years back, and today it's history. So any investment that is not tied to strong fundamental and does not have that asset base to call upon, definitely it's a challenging investment for an individual or company.
Interestingly, and I was going to ask you for a crypto investor, but I can predict your answer. Anyway, let's move on to the next story. The US-Africa summit, and one of the things a lot of people have been saying, and actually some markets, criticism around the fact that you have all these African heads of states in the US, and Biden could only come up with $55 billion for Africa over the next 3 years. What difference is that commitment going to make? And is that commitment actually going to be followed through by the US government?
Well, when you look at that commitment, you looked at a government that just decided that, okay, maybe Africa, we must trade with cautions in investing in Africa. Because, Africa has a lot of challenges. Some of those challenges has to do with our democracy also. And then secondly, remember that you're looking at the Chinese already in Africa. All key infrastructure in Africa and in African countries are being built by China. And the US cannot just sit on the fence knowing that Africa is the future in terms of economy-wise. And then secondly, again, you need to give him credit because all through Barack Obama time, we had those investments coming to Africa. And then he visited Africa. He made us see Africa. We could partner together. But when it came to the time of President Trump, we never saw any meaningful investment in Africa, and America were not ready to come to Africa. So definitely, I for one think that he's just trying to test the waters and see how much this investment will yield for America. But for me, I have my own challenge, which is all about, is this investment going to come in form of helping African companies grow, not just in form of aid where you bring an American company to implement every project that you have to do in Africa. I think we must look at this investment. Is it going to be a collaboration between an American company and an African company, board on board with the kind of challenges we have in Africa? If you look at power, are we going to get the largest American company in terms of power coming to invest in Africa, then partnering with Africa, not just giving us aid, not just putting up those figures for us, and then you're using your own company to implement that. I think the most looked at that aid should not be, Africa has not benefited from any aid, and that's why we are still where we are today. So I'm looking at our leaders to begin to tell them, look, we appreciate what you are doing, but we will prefer a partnership whereby your companies will come in here, build infrastructure, just like the Chinese are doing, not just bringing up your own companies here, and they're not going to stay here for a long time. So for me, I think that's what African leaders should be looking at.
And Muktar, you mentioned the issue of the Chinese, and in some of these reports, this is being viewed as a strategic attempt to also counter Chinese influence. But surely, if you're putting $55 billion forward, we've seen the huge and hundreds of billions of dollars that China has invested in infrastructure across the continent. So I think some would say that the US has to do much better than just a commitment if it really is about China.
Definitely, they will. I'm sure, like I said, they need to do that. Remember, again, that is an investment that is coming from the U.S. government. Some U.S. companies are already in Africa, especially in the oil and gas sector. And I think they are trying to play their face into the fintech sector also. So definitely, but I like you rightly pointed out, I think that their investment is small comparable to what China invests even in one country in Africa. So I expect them to do more. I expect them to do more as the largest economy in Africa, and knowing the kind of role that Africa will play in the near future, especially in the area of agriculture. So definitely, I think they should look at that, and maybe they might come in. And maybe Africa doesn't have those people that lobby so much for Africa like what we have in other economy in the world. So maybe we have to increase our lobbying for
Indeed.
for the American government to get more investment in Africa.
Indeed. Clearly, that report is a bit short on detail, and we'll find out more in the coming weeks and months, hopefully. But look, IMF and Rwanda. Rwanda continues its international romance, as I call it, with many of its, the IFC and its global partners. Now the focus is on climate change. Are we likely to see the IMF replicate this type of opportunity with other African countries? And why do you think Rwanda in particular has benefited from this?
I think we need to look at Rwanda as a case study of a country that went through a lot of challenges and then came out of it and had a leader that has direction, a leader that comes up to build institutions, not just building himself as the man behind the country. So when he's not there, things doesn't work. We saw in Rwanda that we are seeing institutions are being built and institutions are being operated without bureaucracy. So that is attracting a lot of investment in that space. And if you look at their infrastructure also, you see they have one of the best infrastructure in Africa. And then they've created that ease of doing business. So I think it's attracting a lot of investors into that part of the continent. For me, it's the institutions that have been built by the president of Rwanda after they came out from the major challenges that nobody thought Rwanda would come out of it. So that is one. Whether they will they begin to look at investing in other African countries, I think other African countries have to do so much to get this type of climate change investment. Especially, I was expecting that if you want to do this, IMF want to do this. If IMF is investing in an economy like Nigeria, which is the largest economy in Africa, or South Africa, which is the second largest economy in Africa, that will create a snowball effect to other countries. But what we are seeing now, you are just investing in Rwanda. Rwanda GDP contribution to the total African continent is still small, comparable to what you get if you do that in Nigeria. But then IMF cannot just come to Nigeria and begin to force Nigeria and South Africa to imbibe the culture of climate change. They have to start, the government of this country need to initiate those moves. And I think the IMF will be glad to do that for Nigeria and South Africa, being the largest economy in the world, because they seems to be the one that contribute more to the damage in terms of climate change damage in Africa. So I think that's where they should be going. But if those governments from those countries are not doing what they have to do, then definitely don't expect anything.
Indeed, and it must be said that the IMF money is actually a loan to finance projects tackling climate change. And of course, with loans, that will mean Rwanda will need to obviously fulfill some fiscal and financial and reform priorities as part of that agreement. Muktar, it's always fantastic speaking to you. Thank you so much for your interesting and fascinating perspectives on global economic and business news. Thank you very much.